Hello, I'm Rebecca, and this is Glyn, and we are both co-founders of Root Cause Collective. What is Root Cause Collective? I hear you think. So we're actually a brand new initiative. That's why you won't find much on our website. At least that's our excuse for the moment. We're a group of independent freelancers that work with progressive organisations, supporting them to do more impactful campaigning, fundraising, and communications. And we do this by building tailor-made teams for your projects, and then we collaborate with you to achieve your goals. So think of us as an alternative to an agency for those projects that need maybe more than one freelancer or more than one set of skills. We are very aware that we are standing between you and happy hour and or switching off your laptop if you're joining us online today. So we're going to keep this pacey and interactive. Cue interaction. So we want to start this Skillshare on testing and optimization by asking you, what's the first word or phrase that springs to mind when someone says testing and optimization? You can be as honest as you like. That QR code will take you to Slido, where you can add some words to our word cloud. So once you've all had a chance, I can see people still using the QR code. I'll move it in a second, and we will see if our word cloud is clouding. Okay, so first word or phrase that springs to mind when someone says testing and optimizations: time-consuming. Statistical significance, we will talk about that later, very important. Stressful is there. We'll need a developer. Everyone's favorite phrase. Improvement, exciting, it can be. What else do we have? UX, time in there again. Power, laborious. Complicated coming up as a top word, along with time-consuming. I'll give you a few more seconds just to pop in any last thoughts. And people online can do this too. But overall, not completely surprising, the thoughts from in the room and online. These are all common things we hear when we talk to organisations about testing, particularly the fact that it can be really time-consuming. I think we all know that we want to be doing more testing. It's just fitting it in when we've all got such busy jobs, and we want to be getting stuff out the door quickly. So whether you're new to testing or not, we're here to help you out today. So by the end of this half hour, you're going to have a testing plan to take away and action. So this could be on a campaign or appeal or communication that you're working on and implementing using engaging networks at the moment. So that's right. We're going to put one together now in 3 easy steps, and we're going to give you some top tips along the way as well. So I'm going to hand over to Glyn.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, so loads of people today have been talking about testing and optimization and results of tests and things like that. You know, Jack from C6 right at the start of the day, and other people in presentations. So I guess what we wanted to do with this is to kind of do something really practical, so that hopefully you've got a plan for some tests that you can take away and action. So basically, if you're on a laptop now, open up a blank document, or if you're on your phone, open up an email or a note or something like that, or if you're as old as me, open up your notebook and grab a blank page, and just copy down this sentence. Leave a nice big gap to in a minute we'll go through, and you can add your own objectives and what you want to improve as well, basically.
Do not, I repeat, do not look at your email inbox.
Wouldn't it be great if we just synchronized an email to go to everyone?
That would have been cool. Next time.
So basically what we're going to do is kind of think through some things that relate to your own work that we can kind of work into a testing plan. So think about a specific project that you're working on right now. It could be a fundraising appeal that you're looking to raise money for. It could be converting existing cash donors to regular donors. It could be getting petitions on a signature, or it could be getting people to email their MP. Something that really relates to your own area of work. And then have a think about how testing could help you achieve that goal, basically. So not what you would test specifically, but what you'd learn by testing that will help deliver your objectives. So it could be a better conversion rate on the donation page. It could be a better click-through rate on emails, for example. So something like that. And we've got an example for you for a bit of inspiration from a project we're working on at the moment with the leprosy mission. So here we've got our objective is to recruit more new supporters through our quiz from Facebook ads by improving the completion rate. So initially this quiz, we were trying it out, was getting a lot of people clicking through to it, but they weren't going all the way through to the end and opting in. So what we want to do is improve this by getting more people completing it and getting all the way to the end. So yeah, hopefully everyone's come up with something now relating to your own work. So we've got a few, before I hand back to Rebecca to look through the next steps on this, we've got a couple of key tips basically to bear in mind for running a test or tests like this. So the first thing is to make sure that the objective you got is really focused and specific, not too vague. And make sure you've always got one when you're testing. And the second thing is to always make sure that you're not guessing on what it is to improve, or not maybe copying what other organizations have done and have tried, but actually thinking about strategically what's the most important thing for you as an organization to be testing. So, have a look at your own user journey and the data that you've got to think about what's most important for you, because there's no point investing a lot of time testing something that's already performing really well for you as an organization. It's important to focus on the things that aren't. And with any kind of digital campaign, whether it's advocacy or fundraising or an email journey, there are so many different elements that all need to be working as effectively as possible. So, that could be the audience targeting if you're doing Facebook advertising. It could be the segmentation of your email list. But equally, it could be the content that you're using, whether that's on social media or in the emails. And then equally, the landing page that you're sending people to. So there's a whole bunch of different possible metrics and data points that you could be looking at and including in this. So it's important to look at what's actually working quite well, because you could be sending people to a landing page that's converting quite well. But the problem is you're getting the wrong people seeing that, so you're not getting the volume through it that you need. And equally, you could have, as Sean mentioned in his presentation earlier, it's working really, really well, and then Facebook suddenly decide you can't use that anymore. So you've got to start from scratch and start testing, trying out different audiences again. Because this stuff, it's also important to bear in mind, and we'll come back to this, changes all the time as well.
Indeed. So if you're sat there going, I really don't know what it is I need to improve, then have a look at this user journey. Sometimes you can think of it as a funnel, and maybe just write yourself a list of things that you want to go back to the office and look at, to be like, oh, actually, I don't know where it is in here. Just write yourself a list of to-dos to do, and everyone loves a to-do, to go back to the office and go, okay, this is where we should be focusing our time testing, because this is the most important bit that we need to improve on. Okay, that's step one done. We're nearly halfway there. We're nearly at drinks. So step two of your testing plan, I'd like you guys to write this down on your plan. So you know why you're testing, you have that clear objective and purpose, and you know what it is you need to improve, or at least you know what you're going to go back to look at to see what you can improve. Now you need to decide exactly what it is you're going to test, so your variable, and crucially why. So this is where you write out your hypothesis. So the thing I'm going to change and test is this, and crucially I'm changing this because my hypothesis is this. So again, an example from the leprosy mission project we've been doing to bring this to life. We're not going into a huge amount of detail on this today because we're actually talking about it tomorrow. So come along to that if you're interested to find out a bit more. Can't press the button. Okay, so with our quiz, the thing we decided to change and test is putting the first quiz question on the landing page rather than the sign-up form. And our hypothesis was, well, we're going to change this because our Facebook ads have a really high click-through rate, but the landing page we can see has a really high bounce rate, so people are just going straight off it. They're not starting to fill out the form or move on to answer a quiz question. So again, that was us looking at that user journey and seeing where that sticking point was so we can decide what we want to test. And again, we were like, okay, if we have the question on the landing page rather than a form, we'll get more people starting the quiz. We've got more chance of them completing it and opting in and recruiting them at the end of the quiz. More on that tomorrow. All right, top tips for this stage 2. So first of all, if you're just like, well, I don't really know what to change, just sit and write a list, could be you by yourself with your team, of all the things that you think could be impacting that sticking point, what it is you want to improve. And really don't worry if some of this is guesswork. We need to remember that data just tells us what, not why. So a lot of the time you will just be hypothesizing that, okay, we think this is probably what's happening when we're looking at this data. So really don't worry if you're just making educated guesses. Write a whole list, and then you can prioritize that list based on what tests you think are going to have the most impact and what are feasible. Because another thing we hear all the time is like, I just don't have the time or capacity to do this, and I don't know which changes to make first or where to start. I've got all this data. There could be all sorts of things happening. If that's you, don't panic. A prioritization grid can be a really helpful way to make that decision. So again, this is using the leprosy mission as an example. So again, our objective was to recruit more new supporters through our quiz from our Facebook adverts by improving its completion rate. And this was the grid we put together. So Glyn, myself, Debbie, who's also a part of the collective, sat down, scratched our heads and looked at, okay, what's happening here? So these are all the variables we came up with that we could change. And we've scored these based on the expected impact we think they're going to have and how easy it is to actually implement that and do it. And luckily, lots of these things, because we were working in engaging networks, were really simple to change. So the first thing was obviously moving the first question onto the landing page. So we expected that to have a really big impact in getting people to start the quiz. And it was relatively easy to test, a little bit of coding from Glyn, but we got it there, so that got a score of 9. And then we had make the question and answer copy shorter. So we noticed as we were scrolling through, it could be a bit tighter. We could have more momentum in there. So Debbie edited that down. We weren't sure about the impact of that. Thought it probably about a middle, but very easy to change. So that got a score of 8. We noticed that the page load time wasn't that quick, and we had lots of images on the page. So we didn't know if it was necessary to have as much of an impact, but it was very easy just to strip those photos out and just use a couple. So I got a 7, and then changing the button copy. So this was at the end of the quiz. It said something like, send my score or see my score, and we changed it to something like see my results. We just thought basically, okay, that could help people get onto the last page where the form was. So yeah, do yourself a grid. It'll help you really easily choose, particularly if there might be disagreement between you and someone else or the rest of the team about what's having the most impact. You can. This is a great way to kind of have those discussions and come to an agreement. All right, I think this is still me, is it? All right, so you've got step 2 done. We're on to our last stage of the testing plan. So this is working out how you're going to measure whether your test has been successful or not. So I'll know if my test has been successful or not by measuring what are you going to measure. And crucially, what I'll do differently because of this test is this. Now, it sounds really obvious, but you do need something to measure. And it's really helpful to know that up front to make sure that you actually are measuring it, that you've got the tracking in place, that it's all there. It might also be more than one thing that you want to measure at this stage. And what you'll do differently, if you don't have anything to write in that section, then I would just say don't bother testing. I know we can all feel like we need to be testing, but actually it's okay to say, oh, well, actually, even with these results, I don't think we've got the capacity to change, or I know there'll be internal blockers or whatever. It's fine to say, okay, we won't put our energy into this test and go do something else with that time instead. I give you that permission today. So again, going back to our example, so we'll know if our test has been successful or not by measuring the bounce rate, the start rate at the start of the quiz, and also the completion rate. Because we don't just want to measure if people are definitely starting the quiz, we want to also see if they're getting to the end as well. And what we're going to do differently is we're going to keep the question on the first page if it does seem to improve the start rate and doesn't negatively impact the completion rate. Always be aware of unintended consequences when you're testing, because things can change. And if there's no improvement, then we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. So investigate other factors and or move on to testing new audiences. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, so a few more top tips from this section, and then we'll look at some other examples and some results from a few tests from organizations as well. So the first thing is thinking about how many different things you're testing at once, and not testing too many things at once, and hence the importance of prioritization. So are you absolutely certain that you'll know if the change that you've made is actually what's impacting the results? And we've got a really interesting example of this in a moment as well. And then the next thing is actually making sure you can properly measure your tests and the test results before implementing them. And that might be looking at data from engaging networks. It might be looking at data in Google Analytics, Matomo, Plausible, something else, something like that. But make sure you can actually track everything and measure everything properly. And then, last of all, always checking for statistical significance, which is something that came up in the Slido word cloud earlier. And I think this is a really important point. And again, I've got an interesting example showing this in a moment. But the key thing is making sure that you know that the changes that you've made can actually be attributed to what you've done and aren't just random chance. And to be honest, we could genuinely spend an entire conference talking about statistical significance. And there probably are statistical significance conferences you could go to, and we're not going to do that, especially not at the end of the day today. But the key thing is, if you just Google statistical significance calculator and use some of the tools, a lot of free tools out there that come up, and put the results of your tests into that, it will give you an indication of whether or not the changes that you've made and the conversions that you're getting now are statistically significant. And again, we'll come to an interesting example of that in a moment. So, so what I want to show you now is just an example from MS Society, where they were split testing the first page, the start of their donation funnel. And they've done this using the Engaging Networks split testing tool. And so what they've done is they've created version A, start page A. They've finished, done all of the work on setting up that donation page in Engaging Networks, then just duplicated that page and made the changes that they wanted to test in that page. And then they've created a split test page in Engaging Networks and assigned both version A and B to that split test. And then what Engaging Networks will do, if you're using the URL that's produced then by the split test page, then Engaging Networks will just automatically divide the traffic between those two versions of the page, so that you don't have to do any more than that. And one of the challenges with this is you can see there's actually almost like a bit of a spot the difference here, but there's actually maybe four different things that have been changed in these two page versions. So we've got different prompt amounts. We've got the additional question on the version on the right, asking if the donation should go to where the need is greatest or to a specific appeal. And also some of the copy is different on the page. So it might be difficult in this case to actually be certain which of these changes has made a difference to conversion. So one thing we would definitely recommend in a situation like this is just testing these things one at a time, maybe, and not doing them all on the same page. And the next example is from Refugee Action, and this is testing a petition. And so very similar to the donation page, this is also done using the page split test tool in Engaging Networks. This time there's 3 versions. So again, one of them created all the way from scratch, finished, duplicated twice, the changes made, and then assigned to a split test page in the software. Now this was a slightly different example here because actually the petition page itself, all 3 versions were identical. And it's something that Jack mentioned this morning was split testing thank you pages and how important that can be. And this was actually a split test of the thank you page after people had signed the petition. And so version A landed people on a page like this with sharing and donating both as options and a button linking through to a donation page. Version B, that landed people straight onto a donation page. And version C was the daisy chain option. So starting with sharing, asking people, will you share the campaign with your friends and family? Yes, I will, not now. And that bringing up the share buttons and then moving on to a donation ask. So the results of that test, quite interesting. So versions A and C getting exactly the same number of donations, but version B, the donate-only version, which is this one, actually being the one that drove the most donations. And putting those numbers from this table into a statistical significance calculator gave the result, you can be 95% confident that this result is a consequence of the changes you made and not a result of random chance. And that's exactly what we're looking for with statistical significance. We're looking for at least 95% certainty in that case. So one of the things I think is really interesting about this as an example, though, is it'd be really interesting to do a bit of further analysis on these results and actually see the impact of, obviously, version B, bringing in more donations, is not bringing in any shares and more people signing the petition. So what is the impact, potentially, of those lost shares that lost additional new traffic? Be interesting to compare that. And also, with version C, it would be really interesting to see if that was swapped around and had the donating before the sharing. What would be the impact of that? So there's some potential interesting further follow-up tests. But I think it's also really interesting, a key thing from this to note is that obviously other people today have mentioned how daisy chains have really worked most effectively for them. And that obviously wasn't the case for Refugee Action. So it just shows the importance of testing some of these things for your audience and your organization. Because what works for one organization may absolutely not be the right solution for you. So it's always worth, where possible, capacity permitting, trying out with your audience what's feasible, really.
And also where, just thinking about, did Refugee Action get more donations at the expense of shares? That's where going back to your overall objective is so important and making that sure that's agreed amongst your team. Because if you're going for recruitment, then maybe shares is what you want to be prioritizing and testing on over donations, for example. Always a fun conversation between fundraising and campaigning to agree that overall top prioritized objective. So yeah, these are our final top tips. First of all, remember that you don't have to be testing everything in an A/B style. It doesn't all have to be like concurrent testing. You can test things consecutively, but if you're doing that, just try and keep your variables to a minimum because you really want that statistical significance. You want to be confident that the changes you've made are as a result of what you've done, not a different context. I sometimes find myself saying, everything you do is a test, and it sounds like a really crap motivational poster, but it really is in terms of you don't be having to be doing A/B tests to be testing. So everything you're doing is giving you results and telling you something. I find that a lot of people just don't put the time aside to look at their metrics. And I know there's loads, you've got so many, but that's why doing a testing plan and being like, okay, what are the things I want to focus on here can really help. So just remember you should have lots of data at your fingertips to be looking at that all the time and making improvements. As Glyn said, remember things change, so your learnings may not hold true over time. So you might test something this week, get statistical significance, and go, great, we're just going to do that for the rest of time. I'm reminded, I can't remember who it was and at what presentation. It's a bit like a myth now in the sector, but someone gave a presentation and said, oh, we've done loads of testing, and we found that the best time to send emails is Friday lunchtime. And everyone went away and everyone started sending emails at Friday lunchtime. And guess what? Friday lunchtime was no longer the best time to send emails. So yeah, just remember, things change. You probably will have to test again. Finally, it sounds really obvious, but write down your tests and results. Keep them in a central location. This is probably the only time I will stand here and recommend putting things into an Excel spreadsheet. But do that. Share your learnings in your organization. So it's all there. When people move on, you can go back and you can see, well, what have we tested? What have we learned? All those insights are there. And crucially, write it down, like those hypotheses earlier. You think you're going to remember it. You really don't. I'm doing it for Leprosy Mission. I was like, oh, yeah, we'll remember what we discussed. I'm really glad I wrote it down because otherwise we wouldn't be able to put it in the presentation today. So, yeah, just write it down. That is it from us. I can't wait to see you go away with your testing plans and do some tests. Let us know how you get on. I hope that's been a valuable half hour for you all to go away with your own plan. And we're here for any questions, I guess.
Thanks a lot, guys. That's great. Add questions to Slido if you have any. One question is, do you have a specific test that you did that really sticks out in your mind that was like results that you didn't expect?
I'm going to be honest and say, for a long time I worked at the Fair Trade Foundation and did a lot of testing, and getting any statistically significant results was really hard. But I can't remember who told me, but someone once said to me, well, actually, don't worry if your results aren't statistically significant, because that's still telling you something. It's telling you, don't bother, don't worry about that, because it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a real relief that I don't have to test button color or banners, because it doesn't matter. I can go on to other things. So yeah, for all of you guys who might be stuck in a statistical significance nightmare, I hope that that helps. So yeah, not really one that springs to mind in that way, but hopefully useful nonetheless. Glyn, have you done anything?
Well, I think in some ways, I think the refugee action example in here is quite interesting at the difference between the results for version B and version C. Actually, I think is quite interesting because some of you might know Rhiannon Roberts, and she does a lot of work with refugee action, and she set up a lot of these tests. And I think definitely it was kind of slightly surprising that the daisy chain was such a way off the kind of results of the sort of direct landing on the donation page without that sort of guiding people through the process. So yeah, I think that's slightly surprising. But
what about subject line testing with emails? I know that like one answer one day is going to be different if you overuse it, but like using first name, not using first name, those kinds of things. Did that ever?
Yeah, I find it hard to get excited about email subject line testing. It's
probably all I think about.
Not the best answer. First of all, are your open rates okay? If they are, don't worry about it. Go on to focusing your energy on something else. Email open rates are obviously more unreliable these days than they used to, so I'd be focusing more on click-through rates, to be honest. If I had limited time and capacity, that's what I'd be looking to get up. But generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, yeah, I stick to putting people's names in there, keeping it relatively short, using questions have all worked. Glenn, anything to add on?
The only thing is I think it is worth testing still subject lines consistently because stuff changes all the time, and what people respond to online changes all the time. So I think it is worth consistently. I mean, a subject line split test, especially if people, most email platforms, it's pretty easy to do a split test of an email subject line, and it's not a huge amount of work to write the second subject line compared with the first subject line. So I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, just remember not to change anything else in the emails, otherwise.
Yeah, right. Then it's bad data.
Yeah, but and also I would focus on doing it for emails that are really important. Like, not that every email should be important that you send, obviously, but yeah, for big pieces of work, like I would obviously always split test the first email in a welcome journey, for example, the subject line. That's worthwhile doing, I think, or a regular gift ask or something like that. So yeah, but as Glyn says, it doesn't take too much time and energy to do it.
Although, of course, it does make complete sense that Greenpeace Belgium earlier were saying they didn't do that in the midst of an enormous automation, which was a huge test in its own right. I mean, I think that's completely fair enough. But that's something to come back to in future, maybe.
Choose your battles, yeah.
Question, if you could only test one thing on a page, what would it be?
That's a good question.
Limited time, limited resources. I'm just going to test one thing.
I would want to look at Google Analytics, Plausible, Matomo, engaging networks. What are the results of all of the different things that was on that slide that we had earlier, for example? I don't think there isn't one thing that is applicable across the board. It has to be. Sorry.
So many animations.
We're going back
There
in time.
we go. You know, is it? Yeah. What is it? Is it the conversion rate, the opt-in rate, people sharing it? How long are people engaging with the page? It depends what the content is. It depends what the objective of the page is. I don't think you can say always test this thing. Yeah. I think it really has to depend on your own circumstances, what you're trying to achieve, and the actual data that you're seeing in whatever you're measuring your kind of analytics with.
Yeah.
So
I think the first thing I do is look at the page on mobile, assuming that most, find out where your audience is coming to your page from and look at it on tablets and mobile as well. But that just comes into the analysis phase. But yeah, sorry to not have a silver bullet for that one.
Well, I know an organization about 10 years ago that did a test on the submit button color on a donation page, and it was between, I think, orange and red. And red won with statistical significance, and it's been red ever since. So
And now everyone will have
now everyone,
red.
just try it.
Who cares about the brand?
I think they actually rebranded, just everything was red from then on. What are the best platforms to store all your insights on from testing? Do you store all your insights from testing on a platform or a pad of paper?
A Google Sheet isn't a very good answer to that. I mean, just store it wherever you like in a format that makes sense to you. I don't think you need anything too flashy. It's more just be really clear on what... There are so many metrics you can look at. So just be really clear about the ones that are most useful to you and look at those. Because you only have to open like Facebook ads and go down a rabbit hole of so much data. So always go back to your objective and be like, hey, what is the most important thing I need to be looking at here to tell me what the user journey is? But Glenn, in terms of platforms...
Well, the only thing I would add to that is Google Data Studio, I think, is quite interesting. Because especially if you are using a Google Sheet, for example, and you could bring some of that data in and visualize it in a bit more of an interesting way in a Data Studio template. So if you've got a bit more time and capacity, that can be quite an interesting thing to set up and to share internally. So it's not just a spreadsheet, but it's a bit more of an interesting visualization of the data that's in that spreadsheet. And also in theory, you can be pulling in data from analytics, or maybe using something like Supermetrics to bring in data from Facebook as well. And you could also export some data from engaging networks as a CSV file, put that into a Google slide, and then also be a Google Sheet, and then be bringing that into a Data Studio page visualization as well. So it's a bit more work, obviously, to get something like that set up, but I think that can be quite a nice way of bringing together data from different sources that you can then share more widely internally, potentially.
Cool. Okay, there's 2 more questions, and I've also been asked to stretch this out for 5 more minutes. So, we'll be talking about your background and anyway.
Great.
Does the new version of Google Analytics bring any challenges or opportunities? Any thoughts on the new version of Google Analytics?
Too soon to say?
You don't have to say anything.
And that's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things I think is interesting in the future with this, and it's not quite there at the moment. I could go on for more than 5 minutes about this if you want. No,
oh, cool.
No, one of the things that's interesting with that is eventually Google Analytics is kind of going to have an option for it to be, completely anonymous data within there, and that's kind of part of the reason for switching to the new Google Analytics version. And so, it will mean, because at the moment, it should be such for people in the UK and Europe at least, not necessarily across the US necessarily, but for people in the UK and Europe, people are supposed to opt into cookies in order for being tracked in your Google Analytics. So you're not getting a full picture of the data. So if analytics does switch to that kind of fully anonymous, no data sharing for advertising and so on kind of scenario, it would mean you're actually getting a fuller picture of actually how people are engaging with your website and not having to sort of extrapolate that based on a more limited data set. So I think that could be quite an interesting development, but it's not there at the moment, and there's no 100% guarantee that's what's going to happen. I assume Google are probably waiting for the new kind of data protection legislation that's coming out in the UK and EU over the next couple of years. But it'd be interesting to see how that develops. One thing I do think is really interesting in GA4 is the engagement rate that replaces the bounce rate. So I think that's going to be quite a shift, and something that is perhaps an interesting way of measuring whether people are interested in engaging with your content or not. That's going to kind of measure people who land on a page and are there for more than 10 seconds or interact with or visit more than one page, I think, as well. So it could be interesting.
Okay. Cool. I think we'll wrap that up. I was told that we're not allowed to wrap it up now. Thank you so much. That was amazing. We're really, really